Hello, guys, and welcome back to our 81 months of the Dao De Jing, which is now going to be longer than 81 months for sure. Yeah, I have to apologize. I'm trying to sell my house and move to China. Been a little bit busy, but I want to make this program on YouTube because it's cool. So we're going to keep looking at Chapter 4 today, and I anticipate we're going to finish up Chapter 4 pretty soon, and then move on to Chapter 5. Today, I want to talk in a little bit more particular detail about what this chapter means from the internal alchemy perspective. That's really important because this is Qigong project. It's not a it's not Taoist philosophy project, although that would be a really interesting project. And so we have to have some relevance to our practice. And I think that probably the school of meditation which really best resonates with the Dao De Jing is internal alchemy. No, I'm biased, okay, but let's look at that and let's without any further ado. Okay, so Dao Chong Er Yong Zhi Huo Bu Ying. Typical interpretation is the Dao is empty and its use can never be made full. Okay, so the key concept here, if you practice internal alchemy, the emptiness is an essential part of practice, and quietude and stillness. But people, they have a hard time understanding what emptiness means, right? So I mean, Hegel didn't help with that. But emptiness from the perspective of Neidan practice, it basically means um, two big things: stillness and clarity, right? Stillness and clarity. But stillness and clarity shouldn't be understood as external functions of the world. They should be understood as internal functions of the self, which resonate with the activity of the world. And so it's you who experiences stillness and clarity. However, when we say stillness and clarity, they're mixed in meaning, but they're also separate in meaning in a certain way. So if you want to talk about them being mixed in meaning, this talking about like a particular way of the mind being in practice, right? When you practice sufficiently, then the mind will generate a sense of stillness and a sense of clarity. But they also are separated to some extent in practice. And the reason for this is because of the concept of qing and zhuo. So qing means clear. It's half of qingjing, stillness and clarity, right? Clarity and stillness, let's say. But then zhuo means turbid, right? So it means like condensed, basically. And so in the nature of creation, according to Chinese thinking in general, right? Not just Taoism, right? Chinese medicine, the Yin Yang school, etc. Right? They all have this. Confucianism has this. Um, in creation, there's basically two big elements that bring creation together. One of which is the condensed material, and one of which is the diffuse material. Okay, so condensed material and diffuse material are both constructed of qi, but the condensed material, this is like something that's tangible, like my cellular telephone, right, is a tangible thing that's made of condensed material, whereas a diffuse material is like the air, right, or like moisture in the air, right? So it's less tangible because I can't see it directly, I can't reach out and grab it, but you can get a hint about it by looking at things like steam, as an example, or looking at sunbeams going through a window. You start to see small dust particles in the air and stuff like that, right? It's relatively more diffuse compared to my cellular telephone, right? So in that regard, when we talk about the Tao being empty and its use never being full, this is relating to the characteristic of the Tao, which is our ultimate psychological and physical goal in practicing meditation in the Taoist context. So, however, to get there, we're okay. I'm guessing if you want to practice qigong and meditation, you're not all the way there yet, right? You want to go there. However, you're stuck with some problems that occur as a reality of being a person that has a physical body and a mind, right? And one of the big problems with it is that the mind is prone to thinking. It's prone to following its own narrative. It's prone to attaching significance to things like sensations and emotions and feelings, and cognating in various different ways. And it associates with the physical body, which itself is relatively condensed material in comparison to the mind, which is kind of floating and amorphous, right? So as a result of these considerations, we are not experiencing a state of clarity and stillness. And clarity especially is difficult to attain. But stillness is somewhat easier to attain. And so if you want to think about how you would revert back to the initial characteristic of the Tao, probably to characterize emptiness, the first thing that you need to understand is that there's different layers of emptiness and there's different ways to experience emptiness. And now, it's very easy to go into a Qigong discussion about this, and there's a lot of Qigong literature, like Pang Ming's Zhineng Qigong Science is a good example of a book that deals with this topic a lot. But if we keep it very specifically about internal alchemy practice, basically there's a function of being which is associated with subconscious or unconscious activities, which is called pre-heaven. And there's an aspect of being which is associated with conscious activities, which is called post-heaven. And this is a real tangible thing. It's a naming convention, but it describes something that actually exists. And so you can think about it in this way, from like a modern perspective. And this is fair to bring into Neidan, because thinkers like Chen Yingning or Jiang Weiqiao or Qianfeng Laoren, right? They're modern people that all talked about this idea. So if you consider the nature of the brain and the nervous system, right, you have a CNS, which is, essentially a lot of your conscious functions are regulated by that. But a lot of also other functions are regulated by it too. But you also have sympathetic and parasympathetic aspects of the nervous system, and then other, smaller branches of the nervous system. And not every aspect of your nervous system and brain obviously are available to your regular perceptual consciousness, right? Your perceptual faculties actually don't pick up the majority of what's going on. You could think of your perceptual faculties as essentially being like the tip of a much, much bigger iceberg of your being, right? And so the post-heaven is kind of defined as those things in the phenomenal world, the world of phenomena, which are relatively more accessible to you, like your conscious thinking, your experience of reality, your sensations, these are all post-heaven things, right? Whereas the pre-heaven would be functions which are underneath that are not consciously available to you. Now, there's, I think that the more salient definition of pre-heaven in a traditionalist internal alchemy or Taoist perspective would be those things which they exist from the time that you're generated as an embryo, right? But you can use this other rationale, which is a little bit more modern, to get sort of a broader comprehension, a broader comprehension of it, which I think is really beneficial, because then you can see that you're carrying around this pre-heaven sort of embryonic state with you all the time, and it refers to those functions which are beneath regular perceptual consciousness. And so if you understand it from that perspective, then stillness and clarity could be understood in either the context of the post-heaven, which is your regular experiential reality, or the pre-heaven. And those two states can impact each other. So again, I want to make something that is relatively proximal to a truth statement here, right? I think there are I understand that people are skeptical of qi stuff, right? And one of the reasons is because it hasn't been explained that well. But I think we can make some statements that are leaning toward truth statements here. And one of them is that the impact of the unconscious aspects of your being certainly impacts the conscious aspects of your being, and vice versa. So as an example, many unconscious aspects of your being dictate the things that you experience consciously, right? Your heart rate increases and you experiencing the feeling of increased heart rate, right? When you become excited, you have like an adrenaline release, cortisol release, and those things which you can't feel them releasing from their relative glands, nevertheless impact you in ways that are quite tangible, like you feel stress, your heart rate, etc., right? Endorphins release, you feel joy, you feel love, right? So these are certainly ways that the pre-heaven impacts the post-heaven, but then the post-heaven experience of reality is one of the things that, for instance, causes those glands to secrete, right, neurotransmitters and hormones. And so in that regard, these are definite true relationships, right? It's absolutely a true aspect of being a human being from the perspective of like a materialist, and I mean like in the philosophical sense, a materialist organic view of the world. Now, so because those are influential on each other, then when you do meditation, right, which is the key point here that we want to talk about, you can understand stillness and clarity as being expressed in both of those states. And you can also understand that those states are mutually influential, right? And so when you're doing your meditation in the internal alchemy context, the central sort of principle is that you want to establish stillness in such a way that it interacts with the some physiological element of your body that is pre-heaven in nature or unconscious in nature. And so what it means is that you have to access a kind of stillness actually that is beneath the regular sensory function, right? So you have to enter into that state which is not connected to the senses, right? It's not connected to, typically the senses are couched in approximately 6 ways, right? You have hearing, vision, smell, taste, mental activity, and physical sensation, right? That's how Neidan people tend to identify the senses. And underneath all of that is something deeper, right? This is the part of the iceberg that's underwater. And that's where you're trying to go when you meditate. So post heaven stillness, right, regulating the mind and being stable and this kind of thing, it's a very important part of practice, but it's a gateway into the deeper part of practice, which is pre heaven, which is, you know, beneath your regular cognition. And it's in a deeper aspect of body and mind that's not normally accessible to you. And so that actually requires you to enter into a process of interacting with Zhuo Qi, with turbid Qi, right? So if you want to say clarity and stillness is like a great value of Neidan practice, clarity and stillness is a great value of Neidan practice, which you have to emerge into as a result of undergoing a process which generates transformation and is predicated on first getting stillness within the context of turbidity rather than clarity. So you don't sit in clarity and try to, you know, imagine what it's like to be in an enlightened environment. You don't imagine yourself as Buddha or any of these kind of things, but instead you revert back into this extremely, you know, profound, still, turbid state that is extremely yin in nature, because broadly yin refers to stillness and yang refers to clarity, right? Stillness and clarity are the maturation or the perfect state of yin and yang. And so when it says Dao Chong Er Yong Zhi Huo Bu Ying, right? The Dao is empty and its use is never forced. Sorry, I should say its use is never filled, right? The idea here is that's the activity of the Dao, and you want to emulate that. But you would have to emulate that by going through a process, because you only have the capacity to be there. You left behind that perfect Tao for a long time, right? That's the basic conceit of internal alchemy, is that as a result of being born and the senses picking up information and being very of the world, and you know, you can think of it again in terms of the nervous system, right? You receive stressors in the environment which basically cause you to degrade over time, right? That's broadly the idea. So to be able to return back to the Tao, you would have to undergo a certain process to revert to that emptiness. So what about not being full? Being full is the thing that ruins the Tao in people, right? So the idea basically is the Tao, because of its emptiness, because of it's not a phenomenon, right? The idea of Taoism is the origin of the universe predates phenomena. It is something that generates phenomena, right? So before it's a basic philosophical premise that before any phenomena can happen, there has to be a precondition for it to happen. And that precondition can't be defined because nothing has existed before it, right? So the basic idea is that the Tao generated the universe like that, but it's always, always, always present in the universe as a result of its generative capacity, right? It's this thing that predates generation but causes generation to happen. And so all things spill out of it, but all things therefore are contained inside of it. And yet it doesn't cause the Tao to cease functioning, right? So when it says 刀虫而阳，用之火不盈, right? The idea is that this is the function of the Tao. Because of its emptiness, it can hold all being within it without ever running out of its potential. And so you can imagine, as a person who wants to cultivate the Tao, that's your goal, right? But you have to get there by becoming empty, and becoming empty first means to become still and enter into a state which is extremely, extremely yin in nature. And then there's a conversion that happens between yin and yang in that very deep state. That's more than we want to talk about today, but that's the basic idea. And so you can consider that from the Neidan perspective, this first line could be interpreted somehow in a way which is about finding a way to return back to emptiness. And then the idea is that ultimately that has pre-heaven and post-heaven considerations. So the result of practicing stillness in the pre-heaven leads to emptiness because it empties the mind, right? And so the mind returns back to an original state that doesn't have any kind of, specialized, individuated, or dualistic cognition. And then as a result of that, then it kind of incubates, and it generates energy, right? And the energy then causes the clarification of the mind once it emerges from the profound meditation state, right? So this is how you get launched into clarity, so to speak, as a result of first attaining complete stillness and complete yin. Then the post heaven sort of phenomenon mind disappears, and it generates pre heaven, profound meditation state. Then when that completes, and that results basically in the Tao recreating yang energy in the body, that's what causes the mind to suddenly reappear in its clarified and enlightened state, right? That's the basic idea. So, and there's only one book that fully explains the Dao De Jing from the Neidan perspective. That's yeah, I have it right here. Thank you to my student Wes Tasker for sending me this beautiful edition in the mail. It's much prettier than my paperback edition. So Huang Yuanji Dao De Jing Chanwei is the only annotation of the Dao De Jing that is completely Neidan focused. And so, the chapter 4 from his book may be a little bit different than I explained here. I'm just kind of giving you sort of my practitioner's notes, and I'm not going by any one specific text. So that's the first line. Then yuan shi si wan wu zhi zong, right? So yuan means like a abyss, or like a really, really deep water running under two cliffs, and the myriad being's ancestor. So it's so deep, it seems like the myriad being's ancestor. It's like this being bubbles out of nowhere, and all things come from it, right? That's the basic idea. In Neidan practice, I don't want this video to go on for an hour, so I'm going to start to go a little faster. But in Neidan practice, basically the idea is when you reach this ultimate state of emptiness, that's where the life energy comes from. That's where the being bubbles up from. And so if you can do that, then you will get, launched out the other end, and you will experience the nature of being proximal to the Tao, right? More proximal to the Tao than you would be if you're, thinking and doing, right? Okay, so then, but it's the deepest thing. It's empty. It doesn't have a character. That's the basic idea. So 错取 dull the sharpness. Okay, so dull the sharpness, I perceive it to mean that the sharpness is the capacity of the mind, right? The mind latches onto things. The mind is sharp. The mind is pugnacious. The mind is fast. So dull the sharpness should be return back to a state of inner purity and inner peace, and don't engage in that kind of, very martial behavior and very martial way of thinking that people do, right? Let's be less ballistic and more inward looking. And then you can reveal something essential and true about yourself, which wouldn't be revealed if the mind is always doing that clinging thing that it does. So then the next part, jie qi fan, right? So unbind the knots, right? So the idea is a very similar idea, right? To meditate properly, and by the way, right, when you think about Taoism, meditation is a part of Taoism, right? But personal ethical cultivation, reshaping your view of the world, changing the way that you act, That's the real Taoism, right? And then the meditation part, it helps you to do it, and it's wonderful. But the most important part is that you transform yourself as an ethical actor in the world to become more in touch with being natural. And so it's not about affecting a certain kind of behavior which you think is moral. It's about naturally acting in a good way. Neo-Confucianism borrowed a lot from Taoism, and the most touching Neo-Confucian essay, from my perspective, is Wang Yangming, one of the four greats of Confucianism. He says, in the winter, if your old father was cold, you wouldn't have to think to find a way to warm him up. You would just do it. And if in the summertime he was too hot, you wouldn't have to think to go find a way to cool him down. You just do it. That's what the real natural mind is like. So it's not that concern bubbles up, right? It's not that you have to suppress it. That's not a bad thing. The right thing to do is to act in the right way. It's just that if you capture the essence of what it means to operate in the world as a decent person, it's something that should come to you naturally. It shouldn't require too much effort to be able to do the right thing, right? That's a very, very beautiful idea. It's a very utopian idea, and I don't know if it's completely true or not. But if you subscribe to this way of practicing, right, you want to do Neidan or some other meditation system that's sort of in the Taoist or Confucian or Buddhist world, thinking this way helps you develop yourself as a person. So whether this is absolutely true or not, and whether maybe there's other ethical considerations that you have to think about, those are all that's fair game. But unbinding the knots and dulling the sharpness, the idea here effectively is that release that which is internal to you, that's causing you to get caught up and causing you to not be the person who you probably would prefer to be, right? So that, anyway, that's the basic idea. Okay. And I'm kind of taking liberties too. Okay, so he qi guang, so harmonize the light, tong qi chen, merge with the dust. So many different interpretations of this. um, Let me give you one that I think is useful. Okay, this is basic Neidan class. If you watch this far, you get a basic Neidan class. So my belief philosophically is, the idea here is that you are trying to, Dao De Jing is about trying to become a sage leader, right? It's about government people in the warring states trying to help the people without interfering too much in their lives. But from the perspective of practice, right? If you want to talk about harmonizing the light, so how do you do it? Okay, so you sit in a comfortable position and you put your hands in your lap or wherever. You can do a mudra if you know how to do mudras. Simple, okay? Keep it simple. And then what you would do is you sit upright comfortably. Don't take on a definite posture. Allow your attention to be on the tip of your nose with your eyes about a quarter open. And just let your breathing be natural. Then lightly close your eyes and become aware of the light on the back of your eyelids. Then direct your breath to your lower dantian, so breathe in and expand your abdomen outward and downward. Breathe out and allow your abdomen to relax naturally. And keep the awareness of your mind like the light on the back of your eyes. Let it mix together with your breath in your lower abdomen. So one breath in, one breath out, all through the nose, very, very silently. And then keep doing that and let your mind mix together with the breath so that the mind becomes very peaceful and very quiet and very deep. And then gradually through this process, you're harmonizing the light of your mind, right? Your spiritual awareness with the inner essence of your body. And when you do that sufficiently, the mind will become deeper and deeper and more peaceful. And eventually you'll forget your body and even forget your thoughts and forget your breath. And then you can revert back to the pre-heaven state. And that's the ticket. Okay, that's how you do it. It's one way of doing it. So you can play with that if you want. It's a very great technique. And so that's my my simple interpretation of He Qi Guang Tong Qi Chen, right? Harmonize the light and merge with the dust. Um, 占喜是活存. So it's contained in profound clarity, right? The Tao is contained in profound clarity because remember, these are all actions of the Tao. It's contained in profound clarity. 物不至谁之子. I don't know whose child it is. I just think it's the most beautiful saying, right? Whose child is the Tao? It comes before everything. 想地之贤. It comes even before Di. Di means Shangdi, the god of the ancient Chinese people, right? And so the idea here is if you're practicing Taoism, okay, I understand, if you're doing the Taoist religion, certainly there's the deity culture, etc. But the deities are not meant to describe, individual actors who you need to tell complex stories about. Uh, the deities are meant to represent realized beings who understand the Tao, who embody the Tao in their being, right? And so even if you do deity practice in Taoism, it's very much related to making a model of what it would be like to realize the Tao, right? This is the big idea in Taoism. Now, it's not my practice, okay? I belong to a modern school of thought. I have nothing to do with that, but I do talk, I do have friends who practice the Taoist religion, so I'm able to have some discussions with them and get the basic idea. So, nevertheless, if you want to talk about Neidan practice, right? I don't know whose child it is. In other words, it's so profound. You can't find it. It's not an objective thing. It exists underneath all of your experience. You have to completely forget yourself, and then it can manifest its energy in you. But the energy is only a trace. It's only what's left over from that event taking place. That's the Tao creating reality. That's the Tao creating the golden elixir. This is the key point of Neidan. And so it's so profound, it's even like it's before God, right? That's the basic idea. So what it means, ah, it drives me crazy when I see people talking about, Neidan is about breathing, do reverse breathing and pull up your grain path and pull in the testicles and get the golden essence from the brain and put it in the genitals. This is nonsense. It had nothing to do with Neidan practice at all. At all. Neidan practice is the process of reverting back to the Tao via the pre-heaven state, and for that to have an energetic benefit on the post-heaven state and cause us to gradually transform spiritually so that we embody the Tao in ourselves. That's what Neidan is really about. So I hope this was helpful to you. Okay, chapter 4 of the Dao De Jing, probably the last one we're going to do in this particular program. Then we're going to move on to chapter 5. And between selling my house and moving to China, I will do my best to get this stuff out to you guys. Okay, so thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and take one of my courses. They're great. Okay, see you soon.